We have with us, we have Andrew Jones. Andrew Jones first got involved when he was just in junior high. We have Randall Lee that now is involved with Andrew, and they are going to Mount Ararat together, excavating on the Temple Mount. And then we have the woman that supported Ron Wyatt, that I heard her voice doing the narration of this. We have with us MaryNell Wyatt Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome them to the program. Andrew, I'm going to start with you.
Yes.
You were around before me. You were in junior high at the time. I was long out of junior high, long out of the Marine Corps, but you got involved in this first. I want you to go first to give your background. Then we're going to have you introduce the rest of the people here at the dais today.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, as you mentioned, I was just a kid in junior high in Northern California. And one evening, my dad told me that a person was coming to a local church. His name was Ron Wyatt, and he was going to do a one-night seminar on biblical archaeology. Wow. And so I was interested in archaeology at the time and history, but it was a school night, so my dad went for me. And he came back and said, this one man claimed he found everything. And I was interested. I wanted to find out all the facts and find out what his story was. And so I went to a bookstore and bought his book that said Discover Noah's Ark. Mm-hmm. And then I got the courage to find his phone number. Back then, there was no internet, so I'd call 411, and I asked for if there was a Ronald Wyatt in Madison, Tennessee, and the operator found a phone number, and when I called, Ron actually picked up the phone. And I had tons of questions. So since that time, from the early 90s until he passed away, I would call their house a lot and talk to him and MaryNell as a kid going through junior high and high school and college with many questions. And I would call other people who was involved with the work. And then after that, I was able to finally go to the site in 1997 and see Noah's Ark for the first time. And then later, I went on an archaeological dig where I met Randall. And this was in 2003. We were in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And we became good friends since then on many trips across the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, climbing Mount Sinai, to Nuweiba and the Red Sea crossing, to Noah's Ark, which we're talking about tonight.
So you started out basically with the same information that Ron had found Noah's Ark that
Yes.
had been established by the Turkish government at that time, Sodom and Gomorrah.
At that time, all I had was the book. There was no videos out yet, and the newsletters weren't even out yet.
That's right. That goes back so far. Incredible. Let's hear from Randall how you got involved with this.
You know, Michael, I have to thank you because I was in a meeting in Dallas, Texas, and where you were teaching. And after the meeting, I went back, and there on the table was a VHS tape. It said Discoveries of Ron Wyatt, and it had all these discoveries listed. And it's just like, I didn't know what that was, but I decided I'd take that home and try that. Well, I don't watch videos much, so I stuck the thing up by my TV, and it took me about 4 months to really get back around. And I said, and then see it again. And I said, well, I'm just going to put this in and see what's going on. Well, then immediately when I watched it, I had to go see what I could. And so I immediately booked a trip to Noah's Ark, and all the information I had was whatever was on the tape, and it didn't tell you exactly how to get there. And so when I finally arrived in Dubaisit, and I found out that no one knew English, and I had to kind of stumble around, and I finally found someone that could take me out there. And so I got involved with all the discoveries of reading and watched as much as I could. And then we found out there was a dig coming up in 2003 in Jerusalem. And so that's where I met the love of my life. MaryNell was on the dig there, of course, and so that's where I met my wife, that we got married the next year. And so I've been involved with the discoveries ever since. And I have to tell you, there would be no Ron Wyatt without MaryNell, because she has, he did the stuff, but he would bring home the pictures and put them here and there, and MaryNell came in and organized everything, put all the videos together, put all this stuff that you see today. Anything you see, MaryNell put it together.
Yeah.
And so she has all the information, and she knows everything that's gone on through all those years. And it's been a tremendous work, and she's given up her life, really, to promote these discoveries. And I just want to give her credit for the hard work that she's done.
Well, let's now introduce MaryNell Wyatt. This is the first time you have been behind the scenes all these decades. We've been hearing your voice as Ron takes us. You've actually, even the things from Jim and Penny Caldwell, which Ron gave me and told me he wouldn't tell me who the people were because their lives were in danger, but yet I'm hearing your voice narrating all this. It's true. If it weren't for MaryNell, we wouldn't have any of these things. We can be thankful for Ron for digging the holes, and all we're doing is reporting. That's all I'm doing is reporting. You guys have actually been out there. You've been on these digs. You've been to Noah's Ark. You've been in Jerusalem on these digs. MaryNell, you've got a lifetime of experience to tell us about. Take it away. Take it away. We're right here on the cusp of going back to Mount Ararat, and by the end of this program, ladies and gentlemen, by the end of this program, you're going to find out that the permits have been authorized, and there is going to be an excavation of Noah's Ark in northern Turkey, and that's all I'm going to tell you right now, because by the end, aren't we going to invite people to participate in that, Andrew?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so we're holding off because by the end of this series, you are going to be able to register if you would like to participate in an actual dig on Noah's Ark. And so, MaryNell, please.
Well, thank you, Michael, so much for having us here, because it means a lot. Ron has passed away in 1999, and it has seemed like, for me, it's been, what do I do now? My story, my introduction to all of this is I became a committed Christian late in life. I was, I think, 37, and I was a stockbroker, and everyone in the office saw a difference in me. And to make a long story short, one man said, "Hey, I know the man who found Noah's Ark." And my story is so much like everyone else's. And I said, really? And I said, can you call him and see, does he have a book? Does he have anything? Because I was very interested in archaeology, just like everyone else. And he said he didn't have anything. And so one day he walked into my office, and I knew he didn't belong there. This was a brokerage firm. Everyone had on suits and white shirts, and Ron came in with that long white beard, and he was wrinkled, and he said, I heard from a man in your office that there was someone here who wanted to hear about Noah's Ark. And so he came over and he talked to the people in my office for 2 hours, as long as he had money in his in his parking meter. And my life was changed. I didn't see anything except a small picture that he had. And it was literally very small.
Let me ask you something, MaryNell. Yes. This, to me, is the epitome of Ron Wyatt's ministry. One person at a time,
yes,
using everything that he found, not to glorify himself, but to minister to just one person,
yes,
and to do it so intently. You see, if there's anything that's good about me, it's that which I really have absorbed from Ron. He was a loving person. He loved people, and he poured his heart out to every individual. And I saw him do it to homeless people that he picked up alongside the road and fed them, and then gave them a bus ticket. And it was just, that was Ron, and I want people to understand that very thing. And this is what drew you in right to begin with. He paid for his own coins in the meter, and he spent all this time with you.
Yeah, he did. And I went home that day, and I told my daughter my life was changed, because Ron, when he talked, it was the first time in my life I had ever heard anyone talk about Jesus Christ as a real person. Yeah. my life changed. And I decided I wanted to go to Noah's Ark, just like you did. But I couldn't figure out how to get there, and so a man in my office called him for me and said, how do you get there? Excuse me. And Ron said, was telling him names of cities, and this man who was calling him for me said, here, talk to her. So I took the phone, and all I heard was, you can't go out there, you're a girl, it's dangerous. And my heart sank. And so he said, but I tell you what, this was April 15th that he came to see us in 1988. And he said, in the end of May, I'm taking a group over there, and I've just found out that the man that was going to help me with the radar can't go. So if you can take directions, if you can afford it, and if you can stay out of the way, you can go with us. And I said, oh, please, yes, I can do all of those things. So I made the arrangements, and he called me one day, and I was mortified of him, you know, because I thought he was just unlike anybody. I don't mean mortified, but I was nervous around him the first time. And the second time he said, I'm going to Georgia to work on the radar. Can you come go with me so I can teach you how to help me? And I said, okay. And he picked me up. This is the second time I've seen him. And we're going down there, and he shows me how to help him work the radar. And we're coming home, and he's telling me the story of his life. And it was without a doubt the saddest thing I'd ever heard. I mean, I won't go into any details, but I started crying, and I said, why are you telling me this? Because it was private details. And it was at that point that he said, because if we're going to be married, you need to know these things. That's exactly how it happened. And I was stunned. He told me, he said, I'm sorry, I should have told you that I have been divorced, single for 18 years doing this work, and I need help. And I prayed and asked God to send me someone. And he said, when I saw you in that office, I knew it was you. I didn't know it, but that was it.
You know, that's when you said that, that you know, he spoke to about Jesus like he really knew him, and that is really what you get from Ron, because he did know him, you know, in a very personal, intimate way, and he answered Ron's prayer, and you were the answer to that prayer at that point in time, and you know, what a wild ride it has been.
It has been. It's been, well, amazingly, my family, even my ex-husband, I talked to him and told him the story because Ron would be living in the home with my daughter, and I had to talk to my ex-husband, and I told him the story. And he said, well, if this is what you believe, he says, I trust you. And of course, he came to like Ron very much, and everyone did. But it was something that my friends and family, I'm sure, thought I had, you know, was a bit touched in the head at times. But it gave my life meaning. I had meaning to my life. I knew that God had a work for me to do, and I did it the best I could, and it wasn't easy. And I wouldn't trade anything for all of that.
How much pressure you were under. See, you know, as I began getting this information out myself, then I ended up with, in just a few weeks, a 3-ring binder, 3-ring binder full of anti-Ron Wyatt literature.
Yes. And
so I went through this because, you know, the skeptics, the people that are out there, because they're raising money to find Noah's Ark on top of a 17,000-foot post-blood volcano, that in all of the frauds that had gone on out there, saying they were going after Noah's Ark, well, they had to all poo-poo anything that Ron did. And so I had all this stuff, and so I was a skeptic. I was really seriously looking at this, and I know that all of us had to go through that very same thing ourselves. But but you all ended up going to the mountains of Uratu and seeing these very things. And so we're going to have to take a break for just a minute, but then when we come back, I'd like for you to take me on a journey back in time, back to where Ron first woke up to this. I believe it was a Life magazine, an article there that first sparked his interest, and then the rest is history. So we're going to be back right after this word for our sponsors. You are our sponsors. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with MaryNell Wyatt Lee, Randall Lee, and Andrew Jones, and we are going to go to the mountains of Uratu, unlike what the King James Version says, Mount Ararat. No, it's the mountains of Uratu in northern Turkey, and the adventure begins back a long time ago when Ron first started getting an interest in this, or realizing that there may be something still out there. And I have to say, as far as I know, Ron had the greatest command of memorized scripture of any person that I had known at that point. And Ron really was a man of God. He really had a tender heart. And so for him to be able to find these things and see these things, what woke him up to this?
Well, I can't say that Ron found these things. It was actually found, as we can see here, when he opened up this Life magazine from 1960. It told about an expedition out in eastern Turkey and that was investigating a strange boat-shaped object that had been found in an aerial photo. And they said, could this be Noah's Ark? And as Ron read the story, his interest was piqued, but he had 3 young children, I think 2 young children and 1 on the way when this came out. So he couldn't go and do anything at that time. But he believed that this was the most likely candidate to be Noah's Ark, and I'll explain why. He first of all said Uratu, or Ararat. He studied that and found out it was a region in eastern Turkey. And
right, not a specific mountain, but a region, a mountainous region.
Yes, and Mount Ararat is a recent volcanic mountain. The Bible says, and the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains, plural, of Ararat. So when he studied this, he realized that it made sense that the ark would come to rest in a Cretaceous mountain. And Mount Ararat, while it's in a wide plain, the Araxes Plain, the mountains around it are Cretaceous and water-laid. So as he studied Mount Ararat and saw that it was a stratovolcano, he realized there's no way anything could land on that mountain. Plus, it's very high. In this picture right here, you can see its last volcanic eruption in the late 1800s blew out a portion of the mountain a lot like Mount St. Helens. Had the ark even been there, it could not have survived.
Now, I have to point out that while I was in Bible school and seminary, this was after I was in the Marine Corps, and the Sun Pictures Noah's Ark came out at that time, and that was later found to be fraud, that the people that said they brought pieces of Noah's Ark down actually took a lumber and they soaked it in fruit juices and baked it, and so there have been a lot of false things, false flags thrown up there, and so, it's like when it really looks like we've got something, it's like people have been inoculized by satanic inspiration and liars to make money in order to put this down. And as you pointed out, Ron didn't find this. He didn't find it, but he seriously considered this, and whereas everyone else was willing to dismiss it because they don't believe the Bible's true. Ron was different. He believes the Bible is true.
Yes, he did. And so when he read the Genesis account, he realized the author of Genesis, being Moses, it says Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deed. The Hebrew cubit, which came along later when there was a Hebrew nation, would have made the ark 450 feet. But the article said that this boat-shaped site was around 500 feet. And that was what first caught his attention, because the royal Egyptian cubit that would have been in existence during the time of Moses was 515 feet. 300 royal Egyptian cubits would be 515 feet. And here you can see the cubit rod from King Tut's tomb. And so this is what piqued his interest, but he had to wait until his children were older. And finally the time came in 1977 when the boys, Ronnie and Danny, as you can see in this picture, they're both, let's see, it looks like Ronnie is leaning on a rock and Danny is standing to the side, and they were teenagers, but they wanted to go. And this was one of the first photographs. Now, I don't have enough time to really tell the whole story, but I will say that as Ron came into the region, he had no idea where to look, none whatsoever. And he prayed, and the taxi stalled 3 times coming into town. And him and the boys got out each time and stacked up rocks. He says, I don't know why we're doing this, but I'm impressed to do it. And so what you're seeing on the screen now, this photo was from the first pile of rocks when they walked out from the road. They found these strange-looking stones that had crosses carved on them. And this is an actual picture of Ron from '77. He was attacked. Him and the boys were attacked while they were there by thugs who stole everything, and he got away with very little footage and and video. I mean, not video, but 8mm film. But these pictures he did get out with. And over the course of time, Ron has found quite a number of these. When I first went out, well, that's maybe my 3rd or 4th time out there, I drew up these in diagrams so they could be seen better. But what was so interesting was not only their size, their massive size, but the holes in them were scooped out. And Ron theorized that these were drogue stones, not anchor stones, not intended to be an anchor to hold a boat anywhere, but he believed that they were used on Noah's Ark to hold the nose into the waves, that God provided wisdom in giving Noah the knowledge on how to build this ark. And as it came into the area, you'll recall that in the biblical story it talks about the water being so many feet high and so many feet high. Well, how would Noah have known this except he was able to use these as soundings that they snagged as they came into the region. And there's, excuse me.
Yeah, I've lived the last 14 years on the Sea of Galilee, right above it, and on my porch I have several were used as anchor stones that are done this very same way, so that the rope is not worn away, with the knot slipping inside. So when you're showing this, I can relate directly to this as the anchor stones that were used on the fishing vessels, but you're saying drogue stones to keep the boat facing into the waves.
That was what Ron believed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There was a lot of criticism. Oh, these are tombstones, because they have the crosses carved on them. And Ron did find a number of other stones that were still buried in the mud. And when they were uncovered, they did not have the crosses carved on them.
Okay.
So they were carved by later people.
In fact, this last year when I was there, we found a new anchor stone, drogue stone, that had no crosses on it. And we'll show that in one of the upcoming programs on the series.
Okay.
Brand new.
So yeah, the crosses. This is a Byzantine period. So they're obviously they identified, they recognized these, and so how many crosses did they have on these stones?
For almost all of them had 8 crosses. The largest one was Noah, the second largest one was his wife, then the 3 sons, then the 3 daughters-in-law.
Wow.
And so some of them people had carved extras on later. But this is a very in-depth subject, so I'm going to move on to when he finally saw the ark for the first time.
Okay.
He kept walking, and finally he followed one pile, and then he saw this strange boat-shaped formation. And it is not easy to see. I mean, I can see why it was not even spotted until the aerial photos. And this is what he saw. And he realized there's no way he can do any, he says, I can't do any research on this because it's huge, and I don't know where to begin.
Yeah, it's all buried below the ground.
It's all buried.
Yeah.
And so he went home and asked a number of friends to pray for an earthquake. And there's some of those people still around that remember that. And they did. Jesslyn was one of them. And they prayed for an earthquake. And he thinks it was December of '78 when he heard about an earthquake in eastern Turkey. And he was working as a nurse anesthetist, which was his profession right up until he died. And he arranged to go out there in August after he heard about this earthquake. And this was his very first photo.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. I mean, this is mind-boggling because the earth dropped the soil from around the edge of this formation, and it caused a large crack to be formed right down the middle. And as you look here, you can see it's almost like it just popped up out of the ground. And he was able to take measurements inside that crack. And this is a very exciting thing we'll be talking about in a later show, because he thought that he was measuring all the way down to the bedrock. And what we have discovered from this new testing,
Okay,
be sure, don't miss this one.
There's stuff coming up, ladies and gentlemen. We've been waiting a lifetime to see what's going to happen, and so you're giving them the background to this, but there's breaking stuff that caused the Turkish government to go ballistic on this.
Yep. So I'm going to move through rapidly because a lot of you may already know this information, but just to cover it briefly, this was Ron's favorite picture. And because it was, this was several years after that, but that was his favorite picture. And here you can see the remains of rib timbers along the side. And I show this picture so you can get an idea of the basic idea of what you're looking at, the ribs. In this picture, you're seeing the internal structure of a ship they're building, and what I'd like to draw your attention to is in the back, going across this way, is what you would call deck joists. They will build a deck on top of those. And what Ron saw at Noah's Ark, he believed, were the remains of broken deck joists, where the ark had collapsed, and these joists broke off where there had been a floor to that ship. And here's some more of them. Right here, in a line going up the side of the ark, were the remains of petrified wood that he believed were also timbers that held up a deck. And so here you can see where they were. Here's another one of a deck joist sticking out. And what he saw back then, he knew was nothing that was natural. These pictures are not natural because there's a pattern to them. There's, you know.
So there you can see the difference between the petrified timbers and then perhaps the mud flow that filled up.
Exactly.
So you know they're very pronounced there, and they protrude up above as well.
And this picture is before they. What happened is after it popped up or the soil dropped away, it began to erode. So some of these are eroding now. You can see they're going away quickly. But this is one of the first things that he found where you can see these timbers are sticking, you know, they're solid, they're there, there's shape to them. And this right here is the first picture that he took of what turned out to be a rivet. And we'll talk more on that later. But I want to explain one thing. Back before Ron ever came to Turkey, he did experiments in a lake. He built rock formations to see what would cause a ship to come into a mountain and land, and he discovered that a mountain sticking out of the ground out of the water like this, a boat would not go into it, it would go around it, water displacement. Mm-hmm. But he discovered that if he built a crescent shape, that the water, the eddy, would pull the ship in. And so when he saw the boat shape, he looked up above the mountain and he found a similar boat shape up there. It's a crescent shape of mountains. And when he was up there, he found remains of an ancient, settlement of some sort, which he believed he found the bottom, 120-foot section of the bottom of what he believed was the ark. And he believed that what happened was the ark was set up there. There's a spent volcano up there that John Larson has identified that erupted, carried the ship down the mountain in lava where it hit a rock, which impaled it. It swung around in line with the lava flow, and it was there for a long time after the lava hardened. Now, also, while Ron was up there, he found these very strange specimens, and he stuck that in his pocket. It felt like, here is that specimen right here, and that is a very, very important specimen because he went to, he drove out in 1983 to meet Colonel Jim Irwin, and he took this specimen.
Now, Jim Irwin, he's the moon astronaut, is he not?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he wanted to talk to Jim because he knew that he went out there and worked on looking for Noah's Ark. And while Jim was not interested in Ron's site, he was kind enough to take this specimen right here.
Let me see this valuable specimen here.
Feels it's metallic feeling, and it's very heavy.
Very heavy.
And Jim Irwin took it to a friend of his at Los Alamos National Labs where they tested it. And that friend was a man by the name of John Baumgardner. And Dr. Baumgardner did very good testing on this. And here is the analysis of it. It has a high 41% of titanium. It's got 0% iron in it. It's got manganese. It's got, let's see, I'm not sure what some of these are, but the aluminum, it's got aluminum in it. It's got things in there that we did not know how to alloy in our, post-flood world until the 20th century. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this caused a lot of interest.
And it does specify in the Bible that Tubal-Cain was an artificer in brass. Mm-hmm. And so alloys, man-made alloys, they knew about this before the flood. Right. And so here it is, obvious. Now, this led some people to believe that maybe this was a crashed UFO or something just because of the titanium in it. We have to go a long time in the future for us to have titanium in our day and time.
That's true. One of the men who came out there later from Los Alamos told Ron that some of the people who worked on this testing believed that a missile had crashed out there, and that old Tennessee boy thought it was Noah's Ark, which Ron thought that was pretty cute. But that was one of the very first, very strong positive evidences. This was something else that Ron had found way up at the top, just above where he believed the ark settled. He found a stele with an inscription on it. And he didn't get photos of it while it was still in one piece, but it looked like the ridge, the ravens, and a boat shape with 8 people in it. And here is from that particular vantage point showing it. And when Ron was able to relocate it, it had been busted up into pieces. And anyhow, you can see some of the pieces here. The military is actually using it for a border marker. And I'm hoping that I can be with y'all when you go up there and relocate this, Andrew and Randall.
Well, yeah.
I want to go.
Well, I think this is exemplary of what Andrew saw down at Mount Sinai, which is another place that Ron is noted to have secured the evidence of that first. But they have been protecting this under armed guard to keep people from defiling it and busting it all up. And so
Yes.
we're very thankful to the Saudi government
Yes.
for protecting this site. And now we're getting access to this so it can be shown. So ladies and gentlemen, we have so much more. This is just the beginning of this. And so we want you to join us again next week on Shabbat Night Live, because we are going to take this the rest of the way. And by the end of this series, you too are going to be able to register, if you so qualify, to go on a dig for Noah's Ark.